Hey friends, my name is Becca and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to tackle block number 6 of the Sew Becca Sampler. I am so excited to do this for you. So before we dive in and talk about this, I just want to let you know that the Sew Becca Sampler is basically a sew along that I'm doing. It's featuring 12 blocks plus borders and sashing. At the end of this little sew along, we're going to have a nice size throw quilt to cuddle up with, and hopefully we'll be allowed to leave our homes, because I've been under quarantine for several weeks now, and I'm getting a little stir crazy. You can catch up with any of those other blocks either before or after you watch this video. I am keeping all of the blocks in a playlist called the Sew Becca Sampler, and in the description box for each one of those videos, I'm putting a link to each and every block that is a part of this sew along. Second thing I want to talk about is the production quality of this video. I did not realize that while I was sewing this block together and had the camera pointing at me, I was zoomed way in. So most of the shots you were seeing kind of like this, not necessarily the fabric. So sorry, but apparently not sorry enough to completely redo the video. So you're going to have to deal with it. I think you can still put the block together okay, but if you have any questions, you can always reach me at becca@sewbecca.com, or you can use the link in the description box below to join the Becca's Babes Facebook group, and I am sure somebody there can help you, or maybe even me directly. That's all of the announcement that I have. Let me show you the block that we're going to make. This is our finished block this month. It is a house block. This is the first time I've ever done a house block, and I gotta tell you, I am quite pleased with how it turned out. There were a couple things that I don't know that I would have done the same way. In particular, this roof up here, while it looks good, it was a little bit of a struggle just to kind of get all the pieces together. I feel like there could have been an easier way to do this. I feel like this could have been a half square triangle, this could have been a half square triangle, and this could have been a half square triangle, and then this could have just been like a little rectangle or something. You sure would have had more seams, but I think it probably would have been a little bit easier to piece. You could have also made maybe this a flying geese unit, and then, I don't know, it's something to get a straight edge in there. I don't like piecing things on the diagonal. It feels weird. But all in all, it went together pretty nicely. So you can see from my block, I did use 3 contrasting fabrics. The roof and door match. The house is a blue, and then I've got a little yellow for the window. I did use white for my background, but if you wanted to, you could do a very light blue where my white fabric is for like a sky background. I think that would be kind of pretty too. You don't have to have any background fabric in this at all if you don't want to. But I wanted my house to look like it was floating on the background, so I chose to have the white for the background. Okay, look at that. I got a piece of fabric. That's what happens in the sewing room, right? I think those are all the introductions, so let's just cut to the chase and get ready to sew. Okay, it's time to look at our book. The pattern that we're going to look at today is pattern number 48 for the house block. All right, so our block is the house block, and you can see from the cutting instructions on this pattern that there's just a lot of fabric we're going to cut. First, we want to take a look at our finished block and just kind of get an idea for how many different types of fabric are we going to use. I know I'm going to pull background for the sky, if you will, but you could definitely pull a blue or some other color if you wanted to make this a pretty sky. Then I know I'm going to need a fabric for the door, the roof, the window, and then the full body of the house. It looks like I'm going to need the most fabric for the actual house piece. So I think for me, I'm going to end up making the door and the roof match. I'll have a pop of color here for the window, and then I'll have a nice contrasting fabric for the entire body of the house. And then my sky, I'm actually just going to make background. If you're following along in the book, you can cut the fabric that is in the 12-inch column here. This is what you need to cut, but I've been finding that some of their measurements are just a tad too small, and it's causing problems for my block. So I have taken the liberty to adjust those measurements, and I'm going to give them to you on the screen right now. Let's start with your background fabric. You're going to cut 2 pieces of fabric that measure at 2 inches by 5 3/4 of an inch. And then you're going to cut 1 4-inch square and then cut it on the diagonal once. For your roof fabric, you're going to cut 1 2-inch square, and then you'll cut 1 3.5-inch by 10.25-inch rectangle. For your door, you're going to cut 1 rectangle that measures at 2.5 inches by 5.75 of an inch. For your little window, you're going to cut a 2.5-inch by 3.5-inch rectangle. Now let's move on to the house. You're going to need a lot of pieces for this. You're going to start off with 3 rectangles measuring at 2.75 of an inch by 6.5 inches. Then you're going to cut 2 rectangles measuring at 2.5 inches by 5.75 of an inch. You're going to need another 2 rectangles measuring at 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. And then finally, you're going to cut a 7.5-inch square and then subcut it on the diagonal twice. All right, so we have a ton of pieces of fabric here, and given my track record, I have made boo-boos and not sewn them together accurately. So I think the real trick here is just staying organized with all my bits of fabric. So what I've done is I've taken all my fabric and I've grouped them together and I've labeled them. So every cut of fabric you can see has a little piece of paper on it labeling what the fabric is being used for and what the measurement is, and I've just wonder clipped it to that stack of fabric. So as I start working through the pattern, I can just reference my little piece of fabric pretty quickly. If you've got a couple of minutes, I would highly, highly, highly recommend you do the same thing. For some of the fabric where you only have one cut, like your window, you don't need to label the size, you just need to say that it's your window fabric. Same thing goes for your door fabric. And then the roof fabric only has 2 pieces in it, so there's no need to tell you which one is which because it's obvious which is the bigger one and which is the smaller one. What we're going to do is take a look at the diagram in the book, and we're going to start taking some of the smaller units and using those to build slightly bigger units, and then we'll sew all of those bigger units into a block. Follow along with me as we start to sew this together. Okay. All right, let's take a look at our pieces. We're going to work on our door and our window fabric first. And I know from my pattern that I'm going to sew those in the middle of a strip set for my house block. So for my door, we'll work on that first. I'm going to find the pieces of my background that match in size with my door. And that would be my 2.5 inch by 5 3/4 inch pieces of my house. I need 2 of those. And that's really all I've cut. I'm just going to sew this into a strip set with the door in the middle at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've got one side of the house sewn onto the door, and I'm going to press it towards the house. I'm going to press it away from the door. Now I'm going to sew the other side of the house onto the other side of the door. This is just a simple strip set. You're just sewing 3 pieces together. Don't overthink it. Don't get confused. Make sure you're following a good 1/4 inch seam allowance so that all your pieces match up nicely when we're done. I'm going to press this away from the door as well. I'm just finger pressing for now. That's what my door unit is going to look like. This is my door. These are my house fabrics. Now I'm going to take a look at my pattern, and I'm going to do the same thing for my window. You see I'm working with the smallest unit, and then I'm going to start working my way out. So for my window goes up and down like this, and I need to find the pieces that measure at 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches for my house. I'm going to take these clips and labels off, and we're going to do the same thing here that we did with the door. The window is going to go in the middle, and then the 2 pieces of the house will go on the left and the right, and we're going to take a seam here and here. And if we do a good 1/4 inch seam allowance, all of this will come together in the end. For this one, I am going to press away from the window as well. I'm going to finger press this out to the side, and now I'm going to sew this, I'll use this side of the fabric, onto the other edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then we're going to press this out and away. And that's what our window unit is going to look like. We have 2 pieces of the house and our window in the middle. Now we're going to take a look at this, and we're going to keep building out the door frame and the window frame. So if I take the window one, let's do that one first. Take these bigger pieces of our background. These are the only rectangles we have left. It is the 2 3/4 inch by 6.5 inch. There are 3 of them. We need 2 for the window unit and 1 for the door frame. So we're going to take the 2 that are for the window. And if you want to, now would be a great time to press this with an iron so that you get that seam really nice and flat. So I'm just going to reach in front of the camera here. My iron's right over here. And I'm going to press this so that it's laying ultra extra flat when I sew on those other 2 pieces. All right, so there we go. Now I'm going to take my 6.5 inch units, and they line up, you can see, pretty dang near perfect, which makes me very happy. And I'm just going to take a seam along the top. Just to reiterate, I'm laying it out like this. I'm turning that strip set so that it's going up and down this way, and I'm going to put the long piece at the top and the long piece at the bottom, because when it's done, the unit is going to look like this, but this is how I'm going to sew it. So I'm going to sew a long piece to either side so that this window unit is completely encased in the house. All right. So we're going to get this 6.5 inch piece lined up. Scratch it into place so that it's all nice and lined up along the raw edges, not wrong edges. And we're going to put it in the machine and sew at 1/4 inch all the way down. And then I'm going to finger press it up. And then we're going to sew 1 more along the bottom. Quarter inch seam allowance all the way down. I'm going to press this one down and press it nice and flat. This is my window unit. I'm just going to set this aside and we'll come back to that in a little bit. Now I'm going to go to my door frame, and I'm going to take a second to press my door frame with a hot dry iron so that my seams are nice and flat, and then I'm going to take my long piece and lay it across the top of the door frame, because this is how I want it to be when it's all sewn together. It should look like this. So I'm going to take this piece, lay it right side to the door, and then sew this with a 1/4 inch seam. And because my window and door unit are going to be sewn next to each other, I'm going to press this one down so that this seam and this seam will nest together. So I'm going to lay my door on top and then just kind of roll it back and finger press it down. Now when I go to put my window and my door unit together, these 2 seams will nest nicely. I don't want to do this just yet. I'm just going to set these aside. I want to work on the roof. So this one's where things for me, I feel like, will get a little bit tricky. Let's start with the easiest piece first. We're going to pull those 2 rectangles of our background and the 1 square of our roof, which was serving as our chimney, and we're going to sew these in a strip set together so that it looks like that. See how I've got the color in the middle and the background on the side? I'm just going to sew one of these long rectangles to either side of that square, and then I'm going to probably press this in towards that color. 1/4 inch. Okay, I'm going to press it in towards the green, just using my fingers to press right now. And this is what the top of our roof will look like. Now let's move on to the piece that quite honestly scares me a little bit. So just really quick, when we cut our square, our 7.5 inch square for our house block, and then did the X on the back, cutting it corner to corner on the diagonal twice, we got 4 triangles. We actually only need 1 of those, so we can set those other 3 aside. I'm not quite sure how this is all going to play out, but what I do know is that this triangle and this triangle need to be sewn together so that the long side of my white background is on one of the short sides of this house triangle. So I'm going to do that first. I know that that is going to have to happen. And when I do that, I'm lining up down in the little corner down here. And then I'm going to move my needle all the way over to the right so that I can put these little points into my machine off of the feed dogs so that I don't end up with the machine trying to eat my fabric. So there's one step that we missed when we were cutting, and I didn't really see the little asterisks in the book, but what it wants us to do is cut a 45-degree slant on both ends of this fabric. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that back to the cutting mat. Okay, so if you're taking a look at these fabrics, this is where things get a little tricky because we have this piece that we know is going to need to match up right here, right? And then we have this piece down here, and we know that it's going to have to be kind of like this. So this square actually needs to be cut so that there are 2 angles both going in the same way. Now, when I cut this, it doesn't matter if I cut it this way or this way. It just has to be that I'm cutting, starting in the corner from one end and doing a 45-degree line. And then on the opposite long edge, I have to do from that corner going in the same direction, a 45-degree line. I'm going to get a ruler and a rotary cutter and a water-soluble marker. You can use a friction pen if you want to. I don't like them. So I'm going to start in this corner, and I'm going to lay my ruler so that the 45-degree line is right along the bottom edge of my fabric, and the ruler is touching this corner. And I'm just going to mark a line right on that so I can see what I'm doing. And the reason why I'm marking first is because I don't want to mess this up. I want to make sure that I'm cutting this the right way. I want to see the lines before I cut them. So now I'm going to shift the ruler down here, and now I'm going to put the ruler in this corner, make sure that my bottom fabric is still in that 45-degree line, and I'm just going to draw with my water-soluble marker a line going that way. Now these lines you can't really see on camera because it's very faint, but I promise you I see it. What I'm seeing is a line going this way and a line going this way, and they are parallel to each other, and they're both going in the same direction. So now all I'm going to do is just take a minute to put my template, my ruler. I'm going to get a smaller ruler because that one's poking me. So now all I'm going to do is just kind of get a little ruler, and I'm going to put it on the fabric so that it's lined up right against that line that I just drew, and I'm just going to cut on that line. Whew, that makes me nervous. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. All right, these are little triangles that could go in my scrap pile to be used for a future block, maybe. Now, what we're going to do, I suspect, or I'm going to do anyway, is I'm going to lay out my fabric so that everything kind of lines up. Now I've got one seam to take here, it's on an angle, and I've got one seam to take down here. And because I did cut my blocks that I cut on the diagonal a little bit bigger than I normally would have, I am going to position this so that everything is lined up at the top, not the bottom. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is sew this piece on like this, and I think I am going to take the time to trim this piece off. I want the dog ear gone. just to make it a little bit easier to line this up. And then I'm going to get this little dog ear over here. Now I can see that triangle form a little bit better. And I'm going to try to get this edge and this edge lined up. So what that means is I need to lay it just like that. Okay, when I line this up, I am expecting a little bit of this green triangle to be dangling down here and a little bit of the blue to be hanging off of there. In fact, I think this would be a good trick to find the middle of this fabric in the middle of that edge and sew them together. But because I didn't do that, I'm not going to do it now. I have a little piece hanging off down here. I'm just going to sew at 1/4 inch. All the way off. And then hopefully I didn't lose the point on that chimney or that roof pitch or whatever you call it. Ah, I didn't. Yes. I've got extra fabric up here for the point. So the trick that I did is I just made sure that when I lined this up, I had a little bit of that extra fabric hanging down here from the roof and a little bit of the house hanging down here. I know I'm probably going to have to trim this up when I get done sewing it, but at least it's together the way it needs to be. I'm going to press this with my finger so that the seam is going into the roof, not the house, just to kind of reduce some bulk over there. All right, so now for this side, what we're going to do is line it up so that we have our fabric hanging off a little bit. We have a little bit of this dog ear down here and dog ear up here hanging off, and we're going to lay it right on top of that seam. And then I'm going to sew this with 1/4 inch seam allowance. And that's how you do it. So now I'm going to press this probably in towards the roof instead of the background. So this is what the top needs to look like, but I'm not done yet. I'm going to press this and then I'm going to go to my cutting mat and trim it so that this entire thing is only 3.5 inches from here all the way down. All right, so I trimmed this one up and it should measure when it's all done 3.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Now what I'm going to do is take my little 12.5 inch strip that we pieced before that has my little chimney on it, and I'm just going to lay that right on top of here, and we're going to sew this at 1/4 inch. Now when I do that, I'm going to make sure that I'm sewing from the side, the bottom side that has my pitched roof on it, because I've got a point down here for my roof that I really don't want to miss. And if I can see the seam that I'm sewing it through, I can make sure to keep all those beautiful points. I'm just going to use 1/4 inch all the way down. Now this first pitch that I have is just the background, and it doesn't really matter for an X that I'm looking for because there isn't one. I'm creating 1/4 inch gap for me to use. This is the one that I really need to pay attention to. So I'm going to sew this very carefully all the way down. And when I get to this little triangle for my blue, where my house is, the pitch of the roof, I want to pay very close attention to this X for my triangle. I need to make sure that my needle goes right, literally through smack dab the middle of this X. That will make sure that I keep a perfect point. So as I get close to that, I'm just going to slow down. I'm actually losing my seam. I'm sewing at an angle, you guys. This is horrible. Let me get this back in here. All right. All right, now as I get closer to this pitched roof down here, we're going to slow down and we're going to make sure that our needle is lined up with that X. We want our needle to go straight through the X. If it goes a little bit over or on either side, we're either going to lose our point or we're going to float our point. And I can see that I actually went just a hair inside of my seam. So I know I'm going to chop off my point just a tad, and you know what, that's going to be okay for me. So when I do that, I'm going to fold it up towards the top. For me, it is not worth going back through and ripping that seam, but you can see there is my point. If I was a little bit careful, I would have had a perfect point there, but this is sewn together and we're going to take it. The reality is, guys, let me bring you in. The reality is having this point chopped off that much right now might be smacking you in the face and causing you a lot of concern. But once this is all sewn together into its block and all the blocks are sewn together and then it's quilted and then it's washed, this little teeny tiny mistake, you're not going to notice it. And if you do, you probably have some other things that you could be doing with your time. All right, so this is the roof. It's all completed. We're going to set that aside. Now we're going to take our door and our window. The door should be on the left, the window should be on the right, and we're just going to sew them together right along that middle seam. And remember, those two seams that we pressed in opposite directions should butt up against each other nicely. I'm going to sew that with a 1/4 inch. And then we're going to press it to one side or open. It's up to you. I think I'm just going to press it towards the side of the window. And then we're going to take our roof and we're going to lay it on top this way. They should both be measuring at 12.5 inches long if we've cut everything appropriately and sewn them together with a proper 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then for this, I'm just going to press it up towards the top. And that is what our finished block looks like. So what do you think? How'd your block turned out? I'm eager to see your blocks. You can post them in the Becca's Babes group over on Facebook, or you can share them on Instagram with the hashtag Sew Becca Sampler. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll be notified by YouTube when I post block number 7. If you're enjoying this so long, give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. That's all I've got for this video. I hope you guys are staying safe and I look forward to seeing you real soon. Bye.